on my way to a place that I wanted to go to for a very long time, which is the Battle of BRICES Crossroads. And it's special because that's where my great-great-great-great-granddaddy and my great-great-great-great-granddaddy both fought. They were in the 120th Illinois Infantry. Spencer B. Floyd was lieutenant colonel of the whole company, or I should say of the regiment. And then his son was Private James Floyd. This was their very first real battle. They had been under fire once before from some snipers when they were on a gunboat, and they were able to return fire. So technically, that was their first, what you could call a firefight. And they were in the siege of Vicksburg, but they had a place in the back of the field where they didn't really see any action other than some, chessboard, counter troop movements, things like that. This battle that I'm going to was their first real engagement. And I'm driving through this right now, and I can see, a lot of stuff about, Confederate names and things. They fought against Nathan Bedford Forrest. And, well, spoiler alert, they got their butts kicked by Forrest. Like, it's wasn't a highly consequential battle, but it was, it's considered the perfect battle for Forrest, for the Confederates. It's still studied today, by tacticians in West Point and even in other countries, this particular battle. So what happened was Forrest was a cavalryman, and if you don't know about him, he's extremely controversial. He did not like black people. He softened up towards the end of his life, but he did not like black people. He is responsible for the Fort Pillow Massacre, which killed a lot of United States colored troops who begged for mercy, and they were just shot down, several hundred of them, and it was a thing. So you look at you Google it, you know what I mean? Look at his picture. He has these incredibly piercing eyes. At the same, he founded, well, I just shouldn't say founded, but he was the early leader of the Ku Klux Klan, even though he tried to disband it later. There's some things, I guess, to his credit. He was a slave trader, buying and selling slaves before the war. He didn't like black people, so I mean, take that. And very violent. This guy, okay, Forrest is crazy, man. He had 29 horses shot out from under him in the war. He was wounded like 4 or 5 times. He killed 30 Yankee soldiers by his own hand, and I mean literally with his own hand a lot of the time, with his saber or bare hands. I mean, this guy is absolutely nuts. You can't help, however, to grudgingly admire aspects of him, because he was one of the most brilliant tacticians, on a battlefield perspective, possibly of all time, if, certainly the Civil War. So this is called the perfect battle because he was harassing the rear of Sherman. Sherman was marching to the sea in order to try to cut off General Lee and all those guys in the Eastern Front where the main action was happening. But Sherman was terrified of Forrest because Forrest was, harassing his supply lines. If he cut the railroad lines or anything like that, then his army would starve on the march to the sea. So he needed to dispatch an army to destroy Forrest's command. This was done by General Sturgis, who was dispatched out of Memphis, where my ancestors were stationed, to intercept Forrest. So, it was hot. It was June in Mississippi. It had just finished torrential rains, and then the sun came out. Everything turned to soup. It was knee-deep mud the whole way from Memphis to this area of Mississippi. And by the way, I just passed Forrest Memorial Park. I passed Wheeler Avenue. We were both, Wheeler was another Civil War general, Confederate. So it's like, ooh, dead armadillo. I'm in armadillo country. I love to chase armadillos. Anyway, I digress. So Forrest knew about the advance of Sturgis. He didn't know exactly where, so his command was divided up in little pieces, but he knew he was coming because he had a large network of, supporters, spies, and scouts. But Sturgis was bogged down in all that mud. It was knee-deep in mud, and the air had just turned to soup because it was so humid you could cut it with a knife. Ahead of Sturgis was General Grierson's cavalry, a very successful and very smart cavalryman. He got to this place we now know as BRICES CROSSROADS first, because that's what cavalry do. They go ahead of the infantry in order to scout out and see what's going on. Forrest had very few men, but he knew that if he made it look like he had more men, then it would be okay, because he was a master of psychological warfare. He engaged Grierson at BRICES CROSSROADS. He did so by hiding in scrub oaks, spreading his men out thin, shooting from all directions, so that Grierson thought that he was up against a heavy, heavy force. Grierson backed up, because he had gone beyond the crossroads. Now he backed up and formed a tight line at the crossroads, while dispatching back to Sturgis, saying, we need to bring your guys up right now. We are engaged in battle. Had Grierson done a full attack at that moment, he very well could have disrupted Forrest, but he did not know how much troops Forrest really had. So he settled in the lines. And that gave Forrest time to bring up a good portion of the rest of his troops. So now Forrest is reinforced. Grierson is waiting for the infantry, and Sturgis orders the infantry to advance at double quick for 6 miles in the Mississippi heat and mud. The last mile was done at a full run to the battle. A lot of these guys didn't even make it to the battle because they were dropping out from heat exhaustion all along the way. Dehydration. They're wearing wool. They're bogged down with caked on mud. They are in no shape to fight anything. So as soon as these guys got up to the battle, finally, my ancestors, the infantrymen, they were exhausted, and then the cavalry from under Grierson withdrew, leaving only these exhausted, fairly fresh green troops to fight Forrest, who, I mean, it was practically over already. Now, Forrest was outnumbered 4-1, but he made it essentially 1-1 by forcing Grierson to withdraw, by having these guys come up, in piecemeal along the road, and having his guys hiding in the scrub oaks. He was able to pick them off. Then Forrest ordered his artillery to charge. Artillery charging. Slow cannons. And the artillery guy was like, are you sure? Because pretty sure I'm going to get captured. I mean, I'll do what you say, but are you sure? But Forrest looked at him and just said, yeah, no, you're meant to be captured. It's okay. Don't even worry about it. It's like, all right. So the artillery charged and didn't get captured. They charged and started unleashing grape shot at practically point-blank range right into my ancestors, who were having a terrible, terrible time, who were already half dead from heat exhaustion, were expended most of their ammo real quick, and the lines just collapsed. And then, the rest of Forrest's cavalry just came in. It was hand-to-hand fighting. We were just clubbing each other. My ancestors were in no shape. Everyone, because it wasn't just my regiment, the 120th. You had a lot of other guys, including a large contingent of United States colored troops who wore patches on their uniforms saying, remember Fort Pillow. You remember the Fort Pillow massacre. So they were ready for revenge for their fallen comrades. But, they wouldn't have revenge that day, that's for sure. So it all collapsed. And it was all in confusion. There wasn't even any kind of command structure anymore. I mean, the Unions were scattered. They were exhausted. They were dying left and right, getting captured. A lot of captured. Over 1,000 captured. So they make it. They run. They run away. So a lot of them are just throwing down their weapons as they run, just to be able to sprint better. And they make it back to the little town of Ripley. And when they're at Ripley, the battered remains of the Union Army was just trying to reform some kind of order to retreat in an orderly fashion. But Forrest would not let them retreat. At Ripley, he ordered another charge and again disintegrated the Unions. At this point, we get more detail on my ancestors. So the head colonel of the 120th Illinois was Colonel McKeague, George McKeague, if I remember that correctly. He was shot straight through the chest, right off of his horse, by none other than the brother of Nathan Forrest, Jesse Forrest. Jesse runs up and grabs Grierson and takes him prisoner while everything is in chaos. Command devolves to my ancestor, Spencer Floyd. There's no mention of the private, my other ancestor, James Floyd, because he was a low-ranking guy. We don't really know. Like imagine that. Like, you're a father. He probably didn't even know where his son was, in the midst of all of this, and he had to still do his best to keep it together. He was commended at the end of it by another one of his superiors because he was able to gather together 200 random Union troops from all different commands and lead them back through the back roads and swamps 200 miles back to Memphis. So good job, Spencer. But that is the story of the battle. I don't remember all of the casualties. When I get to the battle, I'll be able to tell you, probably because they'll say so. But I remember that there were 1,600 men taken prisoner, and then, several hundred killed and several hundred more wounded. It was essentially, I want to say, around 25% of the entire Union force was a casualty of some nature. So by the end of this, I think, if I remember my notes correctly, and this is from notes like 10 years ago, so do not quote me, I think 120th had like 250 guys left out of, I think, 1,000 that they originally had when they were back in Memphis. It sucked. These guys had friends, cousins, and everything back from Southern Illinois that were all shipped down to Andersonville. And if you know anything about Andersonville, it was absolute hell on earth prisoner of war camp. Google it. You'll see some disturbing images of starved people and whatnot. So, that is the story. Maybe a bit of a spoiler alert, but I'm going there. And I'm in town, well, I should say, sort of nearby town for a friend of mine's wedding. So I'm like, hey, if I'm in town and I got the battlefield right here, I'm going to go see it. So here I go, and I will go, oh, there's Tishomingo. It's also called the Battle of Tishomingo Creek. There's a sign for it right there, so I'm getting close. I will talk to you again when we get there.